Welcome to the PMHNP podcast, the definitive podcast for those passionate about mental health throughout every stage of life. Whether you're an aspiring professional, a seasoned expert, or someone simply keen to understand the intricate world of psychiatric care, you're in the right place. I'm Dr. John Rossi, a certified PMHNP, nurse educator, and lead content creator and instructor at Clarity Education Systems and www.pmhnptesting.com. All right, welcome back. Excited to be here with you today. I think today we're going to talk about something that most students are kind of nervous to approach when preparing for the examination, for the certification exam, as well as seasoned professionals who maybe have been doing this for a while but haven't quite figured it out yet. And that's cultural competency or cultural care within a very specific population or group of people. Understanding who they are, where they're coming from, and then how to apply interventions appropriately or just interact appropriately to make sure that they are taken care of and that they feel comfortable within your practice setting. So cultural competency for the nurse practitioner involves understanding and respecting those diverse beliefs, values, traditions, and practices of the patient or their family members. And this is from very different cultural backgrounds. And this ensures effective and personalized patient care. And so what I want to focus on is what's included within that cultural competency. So that's first, self-awareness. So recognizing one's own cultural biases and beliefs. You have to know what you believe first, so that way you know if something's going to conflict and then how you're going to overcome those conflicts in order to resolve not only yourself, but how you're going to communicate that and act around your patient and their family. And then next is knowledge. So we want to learn about those different cultures and then health-related beliefs within that cultural competency. Skill is next. So communicating effectively with the patients from diverse backgrounds. Learning how to, really connect with them and understand who they are and where they come from by understanding their culture. Fourth, we have attitudes, so respecting the difference and then being open-minded, right? Being open-minded does not mean that you have to agree with whatever your patient or their family believes in. That's not what open-mindedness is. To be open-minded, it means that you're going to be receptive of that person, that you're going to listen to them, that you're going to take into consideration what their thoughts and beliefs are, and then being open-minded enough to create a care plan and to establish a relationship despite your own biases and beliefs. That is an attitude that really fosters quality care. Fifth is encounters, engaging with diverse populations to enhance understanding. Don't be afraid to go out and become familiar with something that you're not comfortable with. Engage in your population, engage in those communities. Take a look, do an inventory of what's around your city and what's around your area. You may be somebody from a very urban setting and environment that couldn't find a job, or maybe they wanted to get education money to help pay back their student loans, so you've moved out into a rural area. That can be a totally different experience for you, and culture can be a huge shock. Get out there, get to know them, be a part of community activities, get on boards, and really dive into that culture so that way you're able to understand who they are and where they're coming from. And then finally, 6 on my list is a desire, right? A genuine interest in becoming culturally competent. So cultural competence, it's care, okay? It's care that improves patient outcomes, it builds trust, and reduces health disparities. These are all very, very game on when it comes to certification questions. And if you are a part of my PMHNP review, you understand that when it comes to cultural competency, because I say it so much, that you want to look for answers that include the word respect. Respect, respect, respect. It is everything when it comes to providing cultural care and cultural competent care. So for cultural competence, self-awareness, categorizations often revolve around recognizing and understanding one's own biases, right? Those stereotypes and those assumptions. So some of the specific areas to consider include ethnocentrism. So this is the belief that one's own culture or group is superior to others. I think just hearing that definition makes you step back and think, oh yeah, that's not a good thing. So we want to be able to overcome that. Next is stereotyping, making assumptions about individuals based on generalized beliefs about their group. Just because a person is a part of a certain culture or group does not mean that they believe everything within that group or that they represent everything that you might have stereotyped about that group. Implicit bias. All right, this is that unconscious attitude or stereotype that affects understanding your actions and your decisions. So we want to avoid or overcome those implicit biases. Cultural blindness. This is ignoring the difference and treating everyone the same, which can lead to overlooking specific needs. We are not all the same. By being a mental health provider, you understand that, or you should understand it. We have to overcome that cultural blindness so that we see the person and then what makes them who they are. And for the most part, that's culture, that's background, that's an upbringing. And we want to understand that. Even if that patient doesn't really practice that cultural influence at that particular point in time in their life, they have been influenced in some way or fashion. So we want to at least know where they come from, understand that they may not be that same person now, but that there's going to be some stuff that's already embedded within them that we want to make sure that we at least approach and talk about, and then we are able to communicate that information clearly, and the patient can say, nope, that's not a part of me, but they're going to know that you've at least done your homework, that you've done your background check, that you understand their culture. Whether or not they are in it or practicing it, that's something that they'll let you know, but we want to at least understand where they come from. Privilege, that's a big one. Recognizing the advantages one might have due to their culture, socioeconomic, or other group memberships associated with that privilege. All right, then we have microaggressions. So this is subtle verbal and nonverbal insults or slights directed at a minority or marginalized group, often unintentional, okay? Microaggressions, while they may come across as being, totally benign to the persons that's doing it, it can be very damaging and very hurtful to an individual that it is, put on, okay? So I feel like I often see this within the LGBTQ community as well as religious communities, where we're not trying to be hurtful or insult them, but just based on our own, knowledge and self-awareness and ethnocentrism and stereotyping, we do that, and we verbally and non-verbally insult without meaning to. So we want to avoid that at all costs. Number 7 on my list here is cultural identity, understanding one's own cultural background, traditions, values, and beliefs. We've talked about that at the beginning and how that forms a part of your cultural competency. Personal experiences with discrimination or bias. So reflecting on times when you've faced or witnessed discrimination, this can help provide insight into the situation that you're dealing with a particular patient. One, it can help you prepare ways to help them deal with some of the biases and discrimination that they're going through. You don't want to personalize it for you. You want to personalize it for your patient. But you can definitely rely on some of those experiences that you've had and then figure out a way to, explain that to your patient to help them come to their own conclusions in ways that they personally can overcome those discriminations. And then finally, we have cultural humility, an ongoing process of self-reflection and learning about other cultures, recognizing one's limits in knowledge. That's being humble, right? Cultural humility. What don't you know? And then what can you do to find out more information and become better educated about your culture? So regular self-reflection, education, and seeking feedback are crucial for identifying and addressing these areas. This is going to ensure more effective and empathetic care for diverse populations. So these specific cultures, within that, a nurse practitioner should really prioritize and then vary how they're going to approach each individual in each cultural area. And so this is going to depend a lot on the region and the population that's being served, and then changing demographics within those specific regions, especially if you're in a very urban area. Now, based on global migration patterns and diverse populations in many Western countries, including the United States, we need to identify specific cultures in order to consider what we would categorize as the top cultures within our environment here in the United States in order to understand them better. So I've kind of put together a list here of the top 15 cultures that you may encounter within our population here in the United States. Again, this is going to vary greatly depending on whether or not you live in the north or the south, in the east or the west, or somewhere right in the middle of America. So Hispanic, or also referred to as Latinx, the customs, values, and health beliefs from various countries in Latin America. All right, so that's going to incorporate that Hispanic Latinx community. African American, so understanding the historical and current experiences affecting health and wellness within the African American population. Native American, or the indigenous population to the United States, so recognizing the diverse tribes and their unique traditions, values, and health practices. We're going to dive into each one of these later on. This is just a general overview of what you might encounter within the United States. Asian American, so this includes diverse groups like Chinese, Filipino, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, and others, each with their own distinct cultures. So again, we don't group them all into one, even though we're calling them Asian Americans. It is very diverse, even within that category. South Asian, so you can see we've already separated it, right? Cultures from countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, all very, apparent within our communities here, especially if you're on the east or west coasts, coastal cities. You're going to see a lot of these individuals from those particular areas. Middle Eastern, North African, so this can include Arabic, Persian, Kurdish, and other cultures from countries like Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Egypt. African, countries in Africa have diverse cultures: Nigerian, Ethiopian, Somali, and more. Africa is a huge and extremely diverse location, and we get a lot of individuals moving and migrating over to the United States. So need to understand those different populations if you're within an area where they have come together and started living together. Okay, European. So we're going to see a lot of European influence in the United States, right? Just makes sense, just based on our history. So while many Western health practices originated from European traditions, understanding specifics within the European culture is important, like Eastern European or Mediterranean practices, because this can be different. And so that's going to be beneficial to understand the differences between the European cultures. Specific areas within the Pacific Islanders, so cultures like Samoan, Tongan, and Hawaiian, very different cultures within the Pacific Islanders category. Caribbean, so cultures and countries like Jamaican, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. Jewish, understanding both religious and ethnic aspects to this group. Muslim, recognizing that Islamic practices and beliefs might influence healthcare and decisions with their experiences. LGBTQ+, so while not a culture per se, it is in a traditional sense, like we were just mentioning other cultures throughout the world. This is very unique population with very unique healthcare needs and experiences that are crucial to understand when dealing with them, and their belief systems and what they associate with and who they associate to. Okay, next we have the refugee and immigrant population. So recent migrants may have a unique health benefit and belief systems and traumas that they're dealing with because of their migration or refugee status, or needs depending on the country and origin of migration. They're all going to have different experiences and different needs. Finally, we have religious groups such as Buddhists, Mormonism, or Latter-day Saint, and others that have specific health-related beliefs and practices. Each one of them is going to be different. A lot to understand, a lot to comprehend, but this is why ongoing education is super important for culture. So it's essential to remember that within each of these cultural groups, there are vast diversities of beliefs, practices, and individual experiences. So rather than stereotyping any one of these, the goal is to gain foundational understanding and then individualized care for each patient. Again, recognizing that, maybe you don't have a huge Hispanic or Latinx population within your area of practice, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to meet someone from that group. So you want to at least have a general working knowledge of each of these, and then specifically if you're working within a very identified group or culture, depending on where you live, you want to have an in-depth knowledge of what you might encounter. All right, so before we dive into specific culture competencies or topics, I do want to review religions most commonly found in the United States and predominantly throughout the world. This is because many of the culture makeups are centered upon religious beliefs and backgrounds, especially based on the religion of the parent or the guardian that raised the patient. So instead of touching on each of these topics, each time that we discuss a specific culture or group, we'll do a general overview right now with these topics, and then whenever we run into it in the specific groups that we are really focusing in on, you've already got a general overview and understanding. So just recognize that if I say Latter-day Saint, you know what we've talked about from this portion of the podcast, and we won't repeat it over and over again. So when providing mental health care to individuals from the Muslim community, so we're going to just go ahead and jump right in here, it's crucial to understand both the teachings of Islam and the cultural nuances that can influence a patient's perception of mental health. So let's go over some of the main teaching points and cultural differences related to Islam. Full disclosure here, and I know I say this in my review videos, I am from Texas. I've worked very hard to get rid of my Texas accent. I speak a couple of languages, so that's kind of helped me in that area, but I am not perfect when it comes to pronouncing words and sometimes medications. I just want to put that out there. I try to say it every time, so that way, every now and then I get a student that gets really upset that I pronounce something wrong. I am human, and so that will happen. And while I try to correct it as I go along, there may be a time where I don't. So please be forgiving and understand that we all say things differently, right? We're talking about culture and getting rid of our, hard feelings towards things that we don't sometimes understand. And while I'm not perfect when it comes to speaking a lot of things, especially when it comes to culture, we're all trying here. So I'm going to do my best. If you want to give me some pointers on how I can do better in the future, I love feedback, and I will take it graciously and with all the humility that I can muster. All right, so with that being said, we'll jump into this. I have tried to practice, especially in this particular area, because and this is important for you too, right? Like, you don't want to be trying to say an individual's cultural language without at least attempting to say it correctly. So we'll try to practice that here today, and I would encourage you to do that in your own time, so that way when you're discussing this with these individuals, they feel like you care enough to try hard to pronounce things the way that they want it to be pronounced, and so on and so forth. Okay. Enough about that. Can you tell I'm sensitive about that topic? I really do think it's important to do your best to clearly communicate so that way they understand how much you care about them. So anyway, moving on. All right, so we're talking about Islam, a Muslim community here. So the basic tenets of Islam. So it exists within 5 pillars of Islam. So those are their core practices all Muslims are expected to uphold. So this includes Shahada, I believe, saying that right, or faith, salat, prayer, zakat, charity, sawam, this is fasting during Ramadan, and Hajj, or pilgrimage to Mecca. So belief in one God. Muslims believe in a singular God, or Allah in Arabic. Really interesting stuff. I think it's so fun to learn about other people's religions. Understanding of mental health within the Muslim community, this is within the spiritual context. So mental health issues might sometimes be perceived as a test from God or the result of insufficient faith. So this perception can be both a source of resilience and, in some cases, a barrier to seeking treatment. We also hear of something called the jinn, or the evil eye. In some cultures, this is believed to influence the supernatural entities, or jinn, of the evil eye, which might be perceived as causes of mental illness, and that's Jinn. So the role of prayer and faith. So daily prayers and strong faith connections can be vital when considering their care, and this is vital to their coping mechanisms. It's essential not to dismiss or underestimate the therapeutic value of religious rituals and beliefs. This is something that can, belief in something and ritually participating and practicing it, in religion they call it miracles. In real life, you may understand it to mean something else if you don't believe in that particular religion, but there is a huge power in that, and we do not want to sideswipe that or don't give it its due respect, because those things can be very powerful, and those rituals and beliefs are important to that individual, so it needs to be important to you as well. Family and community. So within the Muslim community, the family unit and the broader community, these often play a central role in the lives of many Muslims. So family members might be actively involved in care and in decision-making and can be a significant source of support. Gender considerations. So modesty and gender roles can be significant in many Muslim cultures. Be aware of gender dynamics, such as ensuring same-gender therapists if possible, and when necessary, or being sensitive to issues like touch and maintaining eye contact. Also, you may have a situation where in your mind you should be one-on-one with the patient, but because you're the opposite gender, they're going to insist that the spouse is in the room with them. So you just need to be able to adapt to those cultural beliefs and requests, because that's going to be huge in making sure that they understand that you understand where they're coming from. Okay, Ramadan and fasting. So be aware of the month of Ramadan, when Muslims fast from dawn till dusk. This can impact medication schedules, right? Energy levels and overall mood. So that plays right into mental health, especially when it comes to medications. If you have a medication that this patient needs to take food with, that's something that's going to have to be communicated, and then try to come up with an appropriate intervention together. Remember, respecting their cultural beliefs. So stigma and mental health within the Muslim community, as in many communities, there might be that stigma associated with mental illness. And this can impact willingness to speak up or to seek help or to adhere to treatment. And it is very apparent within this population. Now, there is some cultural variability. So Islam is practiced globally, from Indonesia to Nigeria, from Turkey to the United States, with each culture having its interpretations, practices, and nuances within the religion. So, for example, a Muslim from South Asia, a South Asian background, might have different cultural practices than a Muslim from North Africa, right? So understanding those differences. Alcohol and substances. So alcohol and certain drugs are prohibited in Islam, and this can impact substance use disorders and the acceptability of certain treatments and medications. Then finally, we have end-of-life care. So there are specific considerations, rituals, and beliefs about death, dying, and the afterlife in Islam that might come into therapy, so especially when dealing with grief or terminal illnesses. So while providing mental health care to Muslim patients, it's beneficial to approach each individual with an open mind, recognizing the diversity of the experiences and beliefs within the broader Muslim community, and then engaging in active listening, asking questions when unsure, and being respectful. Hint, make sure that you remember that word in answers that you're looking for. Respectful view of religious and cultural practices. So lots to learn. As you can see, with each one of these religions, there's going to be a lot to talk about. So let's move on to the Jewish community. Jewish community is diverse, with variations in religious practices, cultural traditions, and beliefs. So when providing mental health care to the Jewish individual, it's essential to understand these nuances to ensure cultural competent care. So let's go over some of the main points. So the diversity of Jewish movements. Orthodox Judaism. So this adheres strictly to rabbinic interpretation of Jewish law and traditions. Conservative Judaism, this is a bridge between Orthodox and Reform Judaism. It maintains the traditional aspects while being open to some modern perspectives. Then we have Reform Judaism. This emphasizes the evolving nature of faith, focusing more on ethical aspects than on the ritualistic ones. Okay, and then we have the Reconstructionalist Judaism. This views Judaism as a progressively evolving civilization, understanding that there are other groups and distinctions that we maybe didn't talk about within these specific diversities, and their observances of the religion can vary widely within these categories. So let's talk about Sabbath and holidays. So Shabbat, or Sabbath, this is from Friday evening to Saturday evening. Work using electronics, driving, and other activities might be avoided by an observant individual within this population. So be aware of Jewish holidays, as they can affect scheduling and might also be times of heightened emotional states. So an example of that would be reflection during Yom Kippur. So dietary laws, or kashrut. So some Jewish observe dietary restrictions, such as not mixing meat and dairy or consuming only kosher certified foods. This can be relevant if discussing nutrition, eating disorders, or medication that might have non-kosher ingredients. Family and community. So the Jewish community and family unit often play vital, very vital roles in the lives of many Jewish individuals, providing social and emotional support. Life cycle events, so rituals such as bar mitzvahs, weddings, mourning practices, these can all be significant in an individual's life, and it may be relevant to therapeutic approaches. So make sure that you're remembering those family and community rituals and belief systems that go on. Life with these events is going to change, and so being very cognizant of that information and how it's playing into their mood, their well-being, and their situation. So we want to integrate that into their therapeutic planning. So history and persecution. We cannot talk about the Jewish population without identifying this and bringing this up. So be aware of the history of anti-Semitism and events like the Holocaust, which have profound generational impacts. Some Jewish individuals might have family stories or inherited trauma related to these events that you may need to dive into when you're in therapy. So remembering that history is super important with this population. The concept of God and spirituality. So views about God, about suffering, and spirituality can vary widely and can be a source of both comfort, but it can also be a source of distress. Mental health stigma within the Jewish population, as with many communities we've talked about, stigma is there and can be super distressing for individuals within the Jewish population and their willingness to seek help. So end of life and medical ethics. There are specific Jewish beliefs within this category and customs about death, dying, and medical ethics. For instance, the definition of death can be a point of contention in terms of brain death versus cardiac death, so on and so forth. Also about how the body is prepared and how quickly it needs to go into the ground, what can and cannot happen, post-mortem, all things that need to be communicated. So if you're a provider that's working within an inpatient setting where you have a large Jewish community, you want to be familiar with death, dying, and rituals within the Jewish population, as well with all the others. So language and literature, some Jewish individuals might reference texts like the Torah, the Talmud, or the Jewish writings, an expression of their feelings and seeking guidance. Cultural Jews, so some individuals identify more with Jewish culture than religious aspects of Judaism. So they may celebrate holidays culturally, but not observe religious laws. All right, so you can see there's quite a difference in variation in how someone from the Jewish community might present. Understanding who they are, what they believe, what they practice is going to be super important as you go forward in making a treatment plan for these individuals. Okay, let's move on to a big population here in the United States, and that's Christianity. And Christianity engulfs a large group of people and a large group of religious sects or belief systems. So with its vast array of denominations and traditions, Christianity really does offer this rich tapestry of beliefs and practices. So when providing mental health care, understanding the nuances of patients' religious background, again, can help in delivering that culturally sensitive treatment, especially when you have a very diverse group of individuals like Christians that practice very different things, even though they all have a common belief in Jesus Christ. All right, so let's dive into each one of these groups. First, we're going to start with Protestantism. So main teaching points of Protestantism is the emphasis on the Bible as a primary authority in matters of faith, justification of faith alone, and the priesthood of all believers. So mental health considerations with Protestants, some Protestant denominations may lean towards a strong belief in individual responsibility and the healing power of prayer, potentially leading to hesitancy in seeking those professional mental health support systems. All right, moving on to Catholics or Catholicism. So main teaching points here is the papal authority, the significance of the seven sacraments, and the transubstantiation doctrine. So mental health considerations within Catholics. Feelings of guilt and sin may sometimes be intensified by religious teachings, which can have implications for mental health. However, the Catholic Church generally supports the pursuit of mental health care when needed. Baptists. So Baptist main teaching points here is going to be the adult baptism based on personal faith, so believers' baptism, the autonomy of the local church, and the separation of church and state. So mental health considerations for Baptists, this is strong community ties, can be both a support system and a source of pressure. So personal faith experiences may also play into a significant role into an individual's self-worth and identity. Moving on to the Latter-day Saint or Mormonism, they do prefer to go by Latter-day Saint over Mormons. So one of the main teaching points here is additional scriptures like the Book of Mormon, modern-day prophecy, and the unique concept of God and spiritual potential. So mental health considerations, this is a strong community bond. And they also have strong community expectations. So the significance of family roles and the potential stigma around issues like substance use or premarital relations, this can influence a person's mental health dynamics. So we want to be super careful. And let's go ahead and point out, I know we're going to talk about LGBTQ later, but many LGBTQ patients that come from a very Christian background or Muslim or Jewish background are going to potentially have conflicts within family. So we want to make sure that that's understood with respect to religious beliefs. Next up, we have Anglicanism. So the main teaching points here is it's the middle way between Protestantism and Catholicism. So the significance of the Book of Common Prayer and the Episcopal governance is taught within this group. Mental health considerations, while Anglicanism tends to be open to modern psychology and therapy, individual beliefs can vary widely. The church's sacramental aspects might be sources of comfort for some, so just things to consider when dealing with this particular group as well. So general considerations for mental health care when talking about the Christian community, guilt and sin. For some Christians, feelings of guilt, sin, and divine punishment can exacerbate mental health issues. Prayer and faith healing. So some might prioritize spiritual practices or faith healing over professional mental health care. Community and stigma. Now, this is a close-knit church community, right? And often is the case. And this can offer support, but it may also inadvertently foster stigma around the mental health challenges. As far as end-of-life care is concerned, beliefs about the afterlife, salvation, and the sanctity of life can influence decisions and feelings about death and dying. Pastoral counseling, so some might offer or prefer to supplement therapy with pastoral counseling or, with their bishop, with their priest or what have you. It's helpful to understand the role of religious leaders in that individual's life. And then finally, the role of rituals and sacraments. So recognizing the therapeutic potential of rituals and sacraments, how this can be beneficial in that holistic care. So it is essential for mental health professionals like the PMHNP to approach Christian patients, again, with that open mind, devoid of assumptions, asking patients about their personal beliefs and then their practices, and then integrating this into understanding their care, creating a joint therapeutic plan, and then all of this can therefore greatly impact and improve the therapeutic relationship and outcome. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the different cultures that you may encounter in your mental health practice. So cultural competence for the Hispanic Latinx community. We're going to start there. So this, and again, remember, we've already talked about religion, so I'll just mention it briefly if it pertains to a certain group, which most of these it will. If you need to go back and review some of those religious aspects, go ahead and do that as you listen to the podcast. So, starting again with the Hispanic Latinx community. This entails understanding and respecting their diverse beliefs, values, traditions, and practices. So, let's talk about some of the specifics. Language and communication. An example of this would be many Hispanic Latinx patients may be more comfortable speaking in Spanish. So, utilizing translation services or bilingual staff can facilitate effective communication. Family and social structures. So an example would be familismo. This is a cultural value emphasizing the importance of family over the individual. A patient might prioritize family options and opinions over medical decisions or psychiatric decisions. So health beliefs and practices. So some might use traditional or home remedies like aloe vera, for example, is one, sabala, for skin problems, or manzanilla chamomile for digestion and relaxation. Again, not fluent in Spanish. If this were in Portuguese, I would have a much easier way. But you get the picture here. Some of these home remedies tend to be common within the Hispanic Latinx community. So religion and spirituality. So a significant portion of the Hispanic Latinx community is Catholic. So this is definitely going to influence thoughts about birth, death, conception, and end-of-life decisions. Dietary habits. Now, traditionally, diets may be rich in beans, rice, tortillas, and fried foods and refried foods. So understanding these can help in nutritional counseling, especially if you have a patient with some type of eating disorder. Or, on medications like antipsychotics, where diet is going to play a huge part in their treatment plan. So views on healthcare, specifically, some might have a fatalistic view of health, right? Believing illnesses are this result of fate or divine will, which can then affect preventative and care attitudes. There's a cultural understanding known as, make sure I can say this right, Manana. So this means tomorrow, okay? So MANAN, tomorrow syndrome, suggesting a more flexible approach to time. This might influence punctuality for appointments. So there are some socioeconomic factors that we have to consider within the Hispanic Latinx community. Immigrant or undocumented status can affect access to healthcare. Fear of deportation or mistrust in institutions. Definitely need to be aware of that. So gender roles, there is this sense of machismo, or this traditional gender of male emphasizing male dominance and female virtue, respectively. So this can influence health behaviors and then communication dynamics as well. So cultural stigma, it might play, it's going to play to their hesitancy. They're going to be more hesitant to seek mental health services. This is because of concepts like nervios, or nerves, might be used to describe physiological distress instead of actually talking about the psychological and physiological issues that are going on with this patient. So, listening to those cue words, are they talking about their nerves as in nervios as their culture, or are they trying to communicate in some way, and you need to be able to pick up on those cues to know that, hey, we're talking about physiological distress right now. All right, end-of-life care. The family might prefer not to tell an elderly person about the terminal diagnosis, so believing it could cause unnecessary distress on the patient. So open communication, helping them understand dialogues, helping them understand how really it's important for the patient to know what's going on, not only in their care, but in their prognosis, and helping this community understand that and utilize it so that patient, their family members, always feel informed and know what's going on. And then in providing them support, a lot of times they're just afraid that they won't know how to react to the news. So giving them education on how to better prepare the loved one for end of life is going to be vitally important. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the cultural competency for the African American community. Now, this does require a deep understanding of both historical and current factors influencing health and well-being of the African American pops. So here are some specific topics that we're going to talk about, that history and trust, family, social aspect and structure, religion and spirituality. So let's go ahead and start there with that history and trust. So historical events like the Tuskegee syphilis study. This has left a legacy of mistrust towards medical institutions, impacting participation in research and views on care. This is especially true today because we have so much more information available on the internet and through social media. So, they might not have even heard of certain situations that happened so many years ago, back in the 90s and early 2000s. But today, there's a lot of information, and they're really learning about their history and about things that have happened to them and their ancestors. So we want to make sure that we understand that viewpoint as we start to deliver care. Family and social structure. So an example would be the African American family unit might include extended family members. A grandmother, for instance, she may play a significant role in family decisions. Religion and spirituality. The church often plays a central role in African American communities. Belief may influence these views on illnesses, healing, and end-of-life care, mental health care, and stigma. So, some within this community may use traditional remedies or believe in folk illnesses. These are home remedies that might be preferred over modern medicine in some cases. Dietary habits for this population: traditional diets may include soul food, which can be high in fats and sugars. Understanding these, obviously, you're going to help in your nutritional counseling. So, views on healthcare: some African Americans might prioritize prayer or faith, this type of healing, before seeking medical intervention. Direct eye contact might not always be a sign of inattentiveness or respect. In some contexts, it could be perceived as confrontational. So you want to make sure that you're reading those cues so that you understand how this patient is communicating with you. That way you build on the relationship instead of tearing it down. Just because it's not normally how somebody would react in eye contact situations, it may be a population situation. And so you've got to be able to really read the room with that and make sure that you're looking at the patient as a whole instead of just making assumptions based on something like a communication style. Socioeconomic factors. So obviously we're going to talk about some health disparities, often rooted in systemic racism. This can affect access to care, leading to mistrust or skepticism towards healthcare providers. With regard to mental health in general, issues might be underreported due to the stigma that's discussed in cultural terms like feeling, quote, weighed down, close quote, or something like that. This is going to be a common theme throughout many of these groups that we talk about: stigma. Obviously, it's been a part of our culture and our society in the United States for a really long time, especially when you consider these specialty populations. So end-of-life care discussions, they might avoid or really approach the subject a little differently, with a preference for family members to make decisions rather than themselves with their caregiver. So gender roles and expectations, concepts like strong black woman or strong black man or preferring a black provider, this can influence health behaviors, perceptions of vulnerability, and willingness to seek help. So it's okay for your patient to have an expectation of what they want in their provider, but if it's not available, you want to approach it delicately and sensitively, making sure that they understand that while their expectations and requests are important, it may not be available at that time. So you want to do your best to make them feel comfortable. And again, this goes with other groups as well. It's just remembering their culture, remembering their history, and understanding why they may be sensitive to certain gender roles and other expectations when it comes to the provider that's giving them their care. There is nothing wrong with that, but if it's not available, it's not available, and we still want them to know that their care is needed and that we want to give them their care and help them feel comfortable and maybe break that barrier so that way they accept your help even though you might not fit the specific gender role or expectation that they're looking for in their provider. And that's always a good thing. Everybody's learning to work together and become more comfortable within that idea. So helping them with that through conversation and building that critical relationship through mutual understanding and education. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the cultural competence for the Native American or the Indigenous community, and understanding what rich diversity among the tribes and nations and groups there is. Have to consider, obviously, their unique history here in the United States, their belief systems, and their individual practices. So historical trauma, forced relocations, right? Boarding schools, and other historical events that have left profound impacts on the health and trust of institutions within the United States. Definitely going to play into how they seek and accept mental health care. Families and tribal structures, going to be a very important concept for you to understand. Decisions might be made collectively within the group, with elders often holding significant influence in health and well-being matters. Religion and spirituality these practices are very important to this population, like sweat lodges. Sweat lodge ceremonies are often used, or smudging might be used for healing and purification. Health benefits and practices, traditional healers such as medicine men or women might be consulted in conjunction with Western medicine. Traditional diets might emphasize local seasonal foods like maize or bison, which hold cultural and health significance. Some might perceive illness as an imbalance and seek holistic treatments encompassing the mind, the body, and the spirit. Communication styles is very important within this population. Silence might be valued, and taking one's time to respond can give a sign of respect and consideration instead of, just feeling like they're ignoring you or not understanding you. There's power in silence, and this population understands that. So recognizing that and not being thrown off by it, but using that to understand that this person is really thinking about what you're saying. So socioeconomic factors that come into play with the Indigenous or Native Americans are many reservations face challenges like poverty and limited access to health care. And this is absolutely going to influence the health outcomes and their attitudes towards health care. Mental health specifically might be understood in the terms of harmony with nature, their ancestors, and their community. So disruption in this harmony could lead to distress, which manifests in mental health. End-of-life care rituals and customs about death and dying and afterlife can widely vary among the different tribes and can influence that preference for end-of-life care. And then you've got to understand their respect for nature and the land. This makes up a huge part of their culture. The land can hold deep spiritual significance. So displacement or environmental degradation can have a profound health and psychological impact for the Indigenous and Native American populations. All right, let's move on to the Asian community, and this requires recognizing, again, those vast diversity within this category. Asia encompasses a multitude of ethnicities, religions, languages, and histories. So let's identify some of those here with language and communication. So many Asians come from non-English speaking backgrounds. Offering translation services can aid in effective communication within the POP. And family plays a huge role. So we have this concept of filial piety, which is the virtue of exhibiting the proper love and respect for one's parents, their elders, or ancestors. So elders may definitely play a key role in medical decisions within the Asian community. Religion and spirituality, this includes Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, Islam, and other religious influences that really shape their health beliefs and practices. And again, this is going to be found throughout many diverse communities within the Asian population. So understanding who your patient is, their specific community background, and then incorporating those religious beliefs and practices into their holistic care is going to be vital. Dietary habits, some might observe these dietary restrictions such as halal or vegetarian diets, and this is, again, based on religious and cultural beliefs. So some examples of healthcare visions and thoughts include health issues might be stigmatized, leading to an underreporting and then preference for holistic or community-based solutions as opposed to a really, scheduled and rigorous health outlook and treatment plan that sometimes we see within Western societies. Communication style, direct confrontation might be avoided to maintain harmony within the relationship. So nonverbal cues can be significant in conveying those feelings and concerns. First-generation immigrants might face barriers like language, access to healthcare, or discrimination, which is obviously going to affect their overall health experience. Sometimes within the culture, we hear of something called saving face, and this might make individuals hesitant to discuss personal or family mental health issues. So this can definitely be a barrier to mental health care. Then with end-of-life care, in some Asian cultures, discussing death is considered taboo. So families might prefer to shield terminally ill patients and members of their family from a prognosis, which this is obviously a bad thing for that individual. They need to be able to think through that disease and figure out the best way to go about their end-of-life care. So really communicating and over-communicating information to the family in many cases so that the patient is instructed and that they get the information that they need for their end-of-life care is important. And so it's going to require you to really communicate effectively to family members within the Asian culture. Gender roles and expectations. So traditional roles might influence health behaviors like women deferring their needs to prioritize the family. So definitely something you want to consider when trying to figure out what the best option is for them moving forward. We got to take into consideration those traditional roles. So Jewish community, this is a rich tapestry. I mean, I don't know if there's a better way to put it. It's just really rich in tradition and belief and practice and histories, and it shapes that Jewish identity. So religious observance and diversity includes Judaism, has various denominations like Orthodox, Conservative Reform, and Reconstructionist, right? So each one of these are going to have different levels of observance and interpretations about their religious laws. So we do definitely see dietary considerations within the Jewish population. So many observant Jews follow a kosher diet and kosher dietary laws. So this will dictate certain foods and food preparations and combinations to avoid, like mixing dairy with meat. Sabbath or Sabbat and other festivals that are observed. So on Shabbat, which is from Friday evening to Saturday evening, and Jewish holidays, certain activities including using electricity or driving might be prohibited for observant Jews. So as with some of the other groups we've already talked about, Jewish communities may have modesty that comes into play with how they present themselves and how they interact with other groups and with you as a provider. So some observant Jew women may wear skirts and long sleeves and cover their hair after marriage, while some men may wear a yarmulke or other head covering. Medical ethics for this population, questions about end-of-life care, organ donation, or other genetic testing might be approached through the lens of the Jewish law and ethics. So whether or not that comes into play with mental health care, it may, because we do talk about genetics in mental health. Obviously, we need to have a better understanding of what they believe in terms of their medical ethics in order to proceed with them. So birth and circumcision, this is also an area that often gets brought up in care, especially with younger individuals in the Jewish population when they're trying to figure out who they are and how they fit into their culture and how they want to represent themselves today based on modern ideas, but also keep in line with some of their thoughts and traditions of their parents and their grandparents. So it is, again, good to have a solid basis of understanding when dealing with each of these specific populations. So on the 8th day after birth, many Jewish boys undergo a religious circumcision ceremony, which has religious and communal significance. Very important to understand where they're coming from with that. So let's talk about end-of-life practices for the Jewish community. Traditionally, Jewish law emphasizes the sanctity of life. Practices surrounding death, burial, and mourning, like sitting Shiva, are very important. In some tight-knit Jewish communities, there may be some pretty strong stigma around discussing mental health, which can influence treatment-seeking behaviors. So one big thing to remember with this population is their history of persecution. Awareness of historical traumas like the Holocaust is essential as it's left a profound impact, right, on these Jewish families and their communities. So while the individual that you're caring for might not have lived during that time, it is going to be a part of who they are in many cases. So we want to be very sensitive to that and understand where they're coming from in that context. So many Jewish individuals speak the language of their residing country. In this instance, here in the United States, they speak English, but some might be fluent in Hebrew, Yiddish, or other Jewish languages, influencing the way they're able to communicate. So again, making sure that we're offering them appropriate services if they do not speak the language that you are presenting to them in therapy. Okay, and finally for this group, let's talk about some principles or views on healthcare. One of the big ones is the principle of a pikuach nefesh. This prioritizes the sanctity of life, often overruling other religious commandments and then influencing medical decisions. And this is not only just for medical care that you would receive from a primary care provider or surgeon. This also takes into account the mental health care of the individual as well. So big important things that we need to remember. You're not going to be able to understand everything within the Jewish realm of laws, rules, regulations, and beliefs. It's pretty vast. So if you are serving in a community with a large population, you're going to want to reach out to local community leaders and other local providers that may see them more on a daily basis that you're starting to get into. So that way you can really understand what the local population believes and how they are approaching their physical and mental health care in order to provide the most comprehensive health care plan for them. Okay, now we're going to move on to another community that is rich in history and belief, and that is the Islamic community. And this involves recognizing the depth and breadth of traditions, beliefs, and practices that shape Muslim identities. So let's go over some of the main topic areas within this community. First is going to be the 5 pillars of Islam. These are the foundational acts of worship, which include declaration of faith, daily prayer, fasting during Ramadan, almsgiving, and then that final pilgrimage to Mecca. Some of the dietary laws, halal and haram. Muslims observe dietary rules where consuming only halal or permissible foods. Pork and alcohol are haram or forbidden foods. Dress and modesty. Many Muslim women wear the hijab or a headscarf or other modest clothing, where men might also dress modestly to avoid wearing gold or other flashy, what we would consider flashy things within our communities. So prayer, absorbent Muslims pray 5 times a day facing Mecca. Prayer times are spread throughout the day, affecting daily schedules. Obviously, that's going to be something that you want to consider whenever you're trying to schedule your patient, or, if there's no other time and they have to have prayer during that time, providing them an opportunity in a respectful way in order for them to complete their prayer as per their religion. Fasting. So during Ramadan, Muslims fast from dawn until sunset, refraining from eating, drinking, and other specific actions. This could greatly affect certain medications that you give them, but whether or not that medication has to be taken at a certain time and has to be taken with or without food. So fasting definitely needs to be considered when dealing with the Muslim or Islamic community. Okay, medical ethics. So concerns about end-of-life care, organ donation, or medical procedures might be approached considering these Islamic teachings. Again, they're going to be vast, so you've got to get really specific, but to move forward here, as you're going through your understanding and trying to figure out, okay, if this shows up on a question, a test question, you have to consider medical ethics. So if that is a part of, the question itself, what do we want to do? We want to respect, right? So we're going to respect those medical ethics and then find out what needs to be done in order to align with end-of-life care. Gender interactions, this is a big one. So some Muslims might prefer gender-segregated settings or may avoid physical contact with non-related members of the opposite gender. So if you're a male and you have a female member of the Muslim or Islamic community and they do not want to be in the same room with you, or you have to have their husband or their counterpart or their partner in the room with you, these are things that you're going to want to accommodate to the best of your ability, making sure that it aligns with their beliefs. Mental health concerns might be approached with a combination of spiritual and medical interventions, okay? So some might consult religious leaders for guidance, while others are going to heavily rely on you as the quote-unquote authority. And so you're going to want to approach that in a very respectful way. End-of-life practices. Islamic practices around death include quick burials and specific rituals like the ritual of purification. So this could come into play when you're dealing with somebody who's having a hard time with grief, or maybe you're a family member. You have a family member who doesn't necessarily believe in these practices anymore, and they need time to plan the funeral, and they are having a hard time understanding and comprehending why parents may be moving forward so quickly, and you're going to have to be able to talk with them through that, understand the practices of their parents, and then what you can do to help get them through that grief and depressive state, fully understanding that they might not be in line with their traditions, but we still need to approach it keeping those traditions in mind, because it's obviously making a big part of their circumstance and their situation. Arabic holds religious significance. It is the language of the Quran. So greetings are going to be different. I won't try to pronounce things in Arabic. I'm not going to pretend like I know how to do that. But there is a traditional saying like "peace be unto you." Things like this are common. So learning the way that they communicate, learning the way that they introduce themselves and expect you to be receptive and then give it back. obviously going to be super important for this population as well. So be familiar with the language and communication styles of the patient that you're dealing with. And then finally, seeking medical treatment is encouraged in Islam, but practices should respect Islamic teaching. So, for instance, medications containing alcohol might need to be avoided. So much that we could talk about. It's very interesting. If you're not part of this community, if you're not Islamic or you're not Muslim, there's some really great things to learn from these individuals. And again, just like we talked about with the Jewish population, if you're not a part of that organization or community, but you treat a lot of people based on your where you're practicing or where you live, reach out, find others within the community that have understanding, and learn. It's all about getting educated and meeting these patients and their families at their level. That is cultural care. That is respectful care. That is going to be the way you answer these questions. Next up, we're going to talk about South Asian communities. I told you there's a lot of information in this podcast because there's just so many different communities, religions, and organizations that people, associate themselves with. So if you need to take a break, please take a break. I know it's a lot of information, and we're just barely skimming the surface here. But the South Asian community, this community definitely requires you to understand their culture, religion, and language, and their history of war, and there's just so much, and it's because we cover such a large area. These are places like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, and the Maldives. So what do we need to know about them? Well, again, only scratching the surface here, but obviously there's going to be a huge religious diversity. So South Asia is home to a variety of religions, and we've talked about a lot of them already, but Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, Christianity, a lot of other ones, but those are some of the big ones that we've already discussed. And each has its own unique beliefs and practices, and this can greatly impact their healthcare and mental health decisions. There are numerous languages and dialects spoken in South Asia, such as what we just talked about, Hindu, Bengali, Punjabi, Tamil, and many, many more. Understanding the language nuances and potentially needing translation services, these are all going to help aid in communication. If your organization doesn't have communication services, then you are going to need to be that representative that advocates for ensuring that you're able to properly communicate, and you're going to have to pass that up the chain of command within your group, so that way services appropriate for that individual and their culture are taken care of. So dietary practices, many South Asians are vegetarians due to religious and cultural reasons. Others have dietary restrictions such as halal, which we just talked about, or avoiding beef. So some similar ones that we just said during the Muslim or Islamic section. The family, especially extended family, this plays a vital role in decision-making, including healthcare-related decisions. Elders often hold significant influence within South Asian communities. Okay. Views on medicine, traditional medicine systems in South Asia. Some individuals may utilize practices that are with their religious leaders or their community leaders. So it may not be what we consider Western medicine or traditional for the United States. But for many in this group, they'll turn to them first. They'll have their traditions, but then they'll also incorporate some of the Western beliefs and practices as well. So it can be very mixed within the Asian community, South Asian community. So South Asians might prioritize home remedies and seek advice from those elders before consulting with you as the healthcare provider. But they will do it oftentimes. They just turn to their personal and traditional beliefs first. So South Asians view mental health issues based on stigma ideas. I think that's pretty common with each one of the groups that we've talked about. So they're not openly discussing mental health concerns within this community. And this obviously is going to influence their ability to go out and seek mental health care. Traditional gender roles can influence health-seeking behaviors, with women sometimes prioritizing the family health over their own health. Observances for religious festivals and rituals can affect daily routines, and so you have to take that into consideration whenever you're putting together their care plans based on the time of year that it is and what ritual practices they participate in. Talking about communication styles, direct confrontation might be avoided in favor of maintaining harmony. So respectful gestures like not pointing feet at somebody, this is going to be important. So there are some gesture factors that go into place with the South Asian population. All right, finally, socioeconomic and migration factors. This speaks directly to the experiences of first-generation immigrants in terms of language barriers, adaptation stress, and potential discrimination. And this obviously affects the impact of overall health and well-being of the individual. So we've got to consider those experiences of the immigrant population, in this case for the South Asian, but really for any immigrant population. All of those language barriers, adaptation stress, and potential discrimination play a key factor in their ability to get and maintain quality health care and mental health care. Next, we have Middle Eastern North African communities. So while Islam is the predominant religion, there is Christianity, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, Baha'i, and others that are also practiced within the region. And then understanding those religious nuances and holidays, again, are going to be essential. We've covered most of those already. Arabic is widely spoken, but other languages like Berber, Kurdish, Persian, Turkish, and others are also utilized in the region. Many also use French or English due to colonial influences. The family is paramount, with extended family members often involved in decision-making processes, especially regarding health-related and well-being issues. Many women wear the hijab or other modest clothing for religious reasons, as well as men may wear turbans. Respecting these choices, especially in healthcare, is going to be vital to establishing that therapeutic relationship. So halal dietary practices are common due to Islamic principles. Some may abstain from alcohol or other substances based on those religious beliefs. There's a strong reliance on both modern medicine and traditional remedies. So herbal treatments, cupping, and other traditional practices can also be utilized. In some conservative areas, interactions between unrelated men and women might be limited, and this can impact healthcare delivery, especially in intimate or sensitive treatment options. Mental health is often stigmatized, many preferring to discuss these issues within the family unit itself or with their religious leaders as opposed to seeking care from a formal treatment facility. Some of the historical and political content we need to remember and put it into context is understanding the impacts of war, migration, colonization, and political instability within the Middle Eastern and North African countries. This is going to help address potential trauma or displacement-related issues. Islamic beliefs, again, remember we talked about earlier, death, dying, and afterlife thoughts can influence preferences around end-of-life care or understanding depression or trauma-focused therapy options, as well as incorporating organ donation for family members and funeral practices. A lot of very specific culture and religious-related situations revolving around end-of-life care. All right, and then finally we have socioeconomic factors. There are disparities in education, economic opportunities, and access to healthcare, especially when considering displaced or refugee populations, obviously going to influence how they get their care. Okay, now we're going to go beyond just the North African community and talk about Africa in general. Some odd 54 countries, very diverse, lots of traditions, lots of religions. Each of them have their own thoughts and ideas and religious beliefs and cultural beliefs. And while Christianity and Islam are predominant, many also follow indigenous African religions or combine them into other belief systems. So practices within these religions can impact that healthcare, but really often it's like this onion layer effect, right? So when dealing with this population, those health histories and really diving into their social and economic backgrounds is going to be super important within the African community. And we're seeing lots and lots of groups here in the United States that are coming together and living in specific regions of the U.S. So it's obviously going to be super important if you're within that area to understand where they come from. So Africa is home to over 2,000 languages and dialects. Swahili, there's just so many of them. So if you need it, you got to seek out the services to help communicate this information. Remember, on the test questions, That's going to be a key factor. If they don't speak the language, if they don't speak English and you're an English speaker, you have to get some type of formal and recognized translation services in order to communicate and receive communication effectively and appropriately. Herbal remedies, spiritual healers, ancestral practices, these all play crucial roles in healthcare for many Africans, but they also take into account Western medicine as well. So colonial histories, these do affect these Western medicine ideas or institutions. And so it becomes more embedded with some of these traditional tribal and other, background information that they may have from families passed down from generation to generation. But because of post-colonial impacts, Western medicine has been integrated into many of their cultures and traditions. So in many African cultures, the community and extended family, again, play a vital role in that decision-making process. And so we often have to include them in that process to make the patient as comfortable as possible. But remembering we have to do it with the idea of the best care possible, the most appropriate care for that patient, and then helping to explain that to them. Traditional gender roles can influence health-seeking behaviors, access to education, and decision-making within the family. Respect for elders and authority figures is paramount within many of the African cultures, and this is going to really affect the decision-making and communication processes and dynamics. Some communities might have specific dietary customs or restrictions based on religious and cultural beliefs, and then rituals like initiation ceremonies, weddings, and different funeral practices also have health implications and cultural significance. So mental health issues might be addressed within the family or community or through traditional healers. Given Africa's vast diversity, understanding those traditional healing practices and then trying to figure out a way to incorporate your own practice while also respecting that individual's rights, beliefs, and wants is going to be super important. All right, now we're going to move on to European community. Now, the European community is obviously going to be a larger group of what we deal with here in the United States, depending on whether or not they're recent over to the U.S. or if we're talking about long-standing traditions within families that have been in the United States for generations based on our history. So while Christianity and its various denominations like Catholicism, Protestantism, Eastern Orthodoxy, they're prevalent within the European communities. There are also significant Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, and secular communities within the European population as well. So we have to respect those religions. We've said that so many times today. If you walk away from here knowing anything, you just have to do what? You have to respect. It's always about looking for that word respect in your answer. So Europe, it's home to many languages, including English, French, Spanish, German, Russian, tons of others, and each one of them have different dialects and cultural nuances that are associated with the language. So making sure that you're offering them the appropriate language opportunities and help services is going to be important. World wars have influenced how Europeans deal with each other, even within very close borders, and then especially within the United States. There's the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall. There's just so many cultural and psychological impacts that can influence attitudes and beliefs as it pertains to historical contexts within the European population. So Mediterranean diet emphasizes olive oil and fresh vegetables, while Nordic diets might focus more on fish and whole grains. And then understanding these dietary considerations, they're going to come into play when prescribing certain medications. So need to be fairly familiar with certain diet practices. Many European countries have universal healthcare systems, which can influence an individual's expectations with the experiences that they're going to have with healthcare here in the United States. That's going to be a very important form of communication and education topic points. Attitudes towards topics like reproductive health, LGBTQ plus rights, or end-of-life care, it's just so different when you switch between the different European communities and populations. So find out what you're dealing with, what group that you have, what religious practices they have, take into consideration the regional issues and beliefs, and then really focus it in on what that individual wants, and then move forward. So in some cultures, family plays central role in decision making, while other cultures within the European population, it's totally autonomous. It's individual autonomy, and that becomes something that's highly valued over involving family members and others. So again, ask your patient, what do they prefer? And then respect that. Attitudes towards mental health vary. Some countries within Europe are very open about discussing their mental health issues. And then you have some countries that are going to be very standoffish about it and are concerned with that stigma that's still associated with it. Again, a lot of that has to do with the history and the wars that have been fought within particular areas. Okay, so let's go on to Pacific Islander communities. So this is going to include the Polynesian communities, Melanesia, Micronesia, so this Pacific Islander area. The land or sea, these are deeply interconnected within these individuals' identities, that feeling of being connected to their island and to the ocean and sea that surround them. This is going to have a lot to do with their identity and their spiritual well-being and their just general well-being overall. And so you got to recognize that when you're talking with them and helping them understand their connection between the land and the sea. So many Pacific Islanders have holistic views of health, intertwining physical, spiritual, community well-being. Traditional healers and practices may be consulted alongside you as a modern medicine caregiver. The extended family, especially within the Samoan population, play a central role in decision-making support. So a lot of times you're going to have to incorporate them and walk right alongside with them and the patient when trying to come up with the best treatment plan. So while many Pacific Islanders do speak English, native languages such as Tongan, Tahitian, these are also spoken. Respecting that communication practice and offering those services if they feel more comfortable speaking in their native language or the language that they're most familiar with. Christianity is widely practiced within the Pacific Islanders. Strong community church ties. This can influence views on days like Sunday or other religious observances or church-going times. Dietary practices associated with this, as well as end-of-life care. So remember, go back to those Christianity section of the podcast to identify any specific things that you need to be aware of. But very, very heavily influenced by Christianity. The legacy of being great navigators and voyagers is a point of pride and has cultural implications for learning, resilience, and connection to ancestors. So want to make sure that if we can, to incorporate that into their care plans. You're going to see a lot of tattoos and body art, especially within the Samoan population. So these carry deep cultural and personal significance. This represents their identity, their lineage, their stories. You may be able to get a lot more history out of this individual when you talk to them about their tattoos or their body art than they would just speaking to you directly and you asking them, very targeted questions. Explore their history, explore their art, see what you can get from them by looking at their representation on the art on their skin. Very, very cool stories that come out of that. Mental health issues might be addressed within the family or community first, and there may be a preference to discuss challenges with the community or their elders before they discuss it with a caregiver. Traditional diets include root vegetables, seafood, and fruits. And then ceremonies like their first haircut in some Samoan families or community gatherings for specific life milestones. These are all part of their rites of passage and personal celebrations and group celebrations. And then finally, we have the colonial and post-colonial impacts. So these legacies of colonization, nuclear testing, for example, was taking place within these areas. Forced migrations in some Pacific islands. These have had long-lasting health and psychological impacts. Things that need to be considered when dealing with and practicing with Pacific Islander population. All right, then we have the Caribbean community. Can you see? I mean, there's just so many that go on and on and on, but we see so many of these populations now in the United States. So the Caribbean community, rich blend of Indigenous, African, European, Indian, and Chinese influences, among others. There's also others. So this really shapes this region. So the legacy of colonization, transatlantic slave trade, identified labor profoundly shaped this Caribbean social and cultural fabric and lifestyle. So we've got to recognize that history, and then if we need to address any generational trauma associated with it. It's just so interesting, right? You're gonna see some of these patients, and you may not even realize that you have to address some of these generational traumas. But as we dive, especially the older members of the generation, but as you start to untwine that history and really see what's going on there, these are things that you do have to consider when creating their plans. So the Caribbean hosts various religions, including Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, indigenous spiritual practices. So all of these, again, carry those dietary practices, religious beliefs, and special holidays, whatever it may be. We got to take it into consideration. And now, while English is often spoken, there are significant Spanish, French, Dutch, Creole-speaking populations. They're going to have a lot of different nuances and accents that are used. So this can be somewhat difficult to understand sometimes. The Jamaican population is one that comes to mind. So if you aren't clearly hearing what they're saying, you have to be, very cognizant of that and say, you know what, let's clear this up. Is there, let's find a service that we can utilize, or if a family member is there that's able to communicate better in English, or maybe everybody's speaking English, but we're just not understanding it clearly, to re-educate us or educate us for the first time about certain dialects, about certain, ways that they express sentences that just may at first hearing be a little different for us, but can be easily explained. So just look for those communication and language situations to help you communicate better with the patient. All right. So many in the Caribbean, they're gonna utilize herbal remedies and traditional practices alongside or in place of Western medicine. Bush medicine, for example, in the Bahamas, for instance, this is going to utilize native plants for healing as opposed to more traditional medications or therapies that we would often recommend first. All right, festivals and celebrations, events like Carnival in Trinidad. There's different crop celebrations and festivals that go on. Deep cultural and historical influences, music and dance as well. So there's lots of music festivals and genres such as reggae and soca, merengue. Limbo comes from this as well. So all of this is integral to the Caribbean lifestyle and culture. And oftentimes they have deeper meanings to the dances and the cultural aspects themselves. So sometimes if you've got a patient that's really into this, we got to explore it so we can understand what they're expressing and what they're thinking by way of their dance and music interpretations. Gender and sexuality. So while there is growing acceptance of the LGBTQ plus rights in some Caribbean nations, others might have very conservative views, and this influences those religious and cultural beliefs. The Caribbean diet is a blend of its own diverse influences, from African stews to Indian influences. So acknowledging these can be essential when discussing those dietary habits and then certain medications that you want to provide to them. All right. So one of the things that we have to remember in these vulnerable areas, just because of where they are on the map, are hurricanes and other natural disasters. There may be some trauma associated with those, maybe not them personally if they're here in the mainlands, but if they have family that are going through that. And, some cultures and villages get completely wiped out after one of these natural disasters and these environmental impacts. Got to be able to communicate that and discuss that with your patient, because it can impede or keep you from getting to therapeutic successes if we aren't considering some of those environmental concerns that are specific to the Caribbean population. All right, so We do have a couple of additional podcasts that talk about LGBTQ plus communities, but I do want to at least touch on it here because it does have some significant cultural aspects to it. So the LGBTQ plus community is not defined by regional influences, right? It's more to do with sexual orientation, gender identity, and then expression. So this community transcends regional, ethnic, and national boundaries. So let's talk about some of the main issues that we have to look for within this community. So familiarize yourself with terms like cisgender, transgender, non-binary, pansexual, asexual. The list goes on and on. There's quite a few definitions that you need to be aware of. I'll go ahead and reference you to our hour-long podcast that we speak directly about LGBTQ plus communities. So these definitions, keep in mind, these can evolve over time. So it's essential to stay up to date on what the terminology is and the language that's being used within this community. So we want to avoid assumptions. Do not assume someone's gender identity based on their appearance. Instead, you want to ask them for their preferred pronouns or their preferred identification. Transgender individuals face barriers to assessing gender-affirming care, and they may have had negative experiences in healthcare in the past, so they could be very sensitive to those healthcare disparities. You want to prevent that. You want to correct that. You want to be the person that is accepting of everyone and allows them to have a place where they can express themselves and talk about the issues that they're having so that we can treat them and get them the help that they need for their mental health care. Gender-affirming care, now this includes hormone therapies, surgeries, and other procedures that align with an individual's physical characteristics with their gender identity. So while you may not be providing gender-affirming care as a mental health provider, you're definitely going to be helping with the mental health aspects of an individual receiving gender-affirming care from someone like a specialist or their primary care team. So be aware of events like the Stonewall riots, which play a pivotal role in the LGBTQ plus rights movement. There's lots of rights movement examples. Definitely become familiar with their history and what they are proud of and what they consider almost religious in their understanding of their community and their history. Same-sex marriage, legal policies and issues that this community has dealt with. That's an ongoing, while we may have a lot more freedom and protection today than we did even 5 years ago, it's still an ongoing concern. And many of them are quite traumatized by the events that have taken place over the last 50 years. So remember the same-sex marriage issues, adoption rights, workplace discrimination. All of this is going to vary by region and state. So just be familiar with what your groups are going through within your particular region. Family dynamics is a big one here. So LGBTQ plus individuals, they might have non-traditional family structures, or they might face challenges within their families over, their particular identity or how they're living their lifestyle if it's significantly different or even somewhat different than their actual family is living, especially if you have a very conservative family or a religious family that does not align with this patient's thoughts and beliefs within the LGBTQ plus community. Then we want to create safe spaces, creating environments where these individuals feel safe and affirmed, and this happens in clinics that are using gender-neutral restrooms, gender-neutral vocabulary. Now, I fully understand that there's a lot of debate in this area, and you're going to just have to do the best that you can to make sure that your patient is taken care of, okay? So a lot of times we have to set aside our own personal thoughts and beliefs on the topic, and we have to do what that patient needs first. As long as, we're not impeding or hurting them, it's okay for you to say, in your head, right? This is not what I believe, but this is what my patient is experiencing, and I need to be able to give them the care that connects with them. And that is a culturally responsible way of providing care, not only for this population, but every population that you're dealing with. Intersectionality, this is a big thing with the LGBTQ plus population. So each of these individuals might also identify with other marginalized groups. For an example, would be like a Black transgender woman. So we're not just dealing with transgender, we're also dealing with the fact that this person is Black or African American, and they may have some of the other concerns that we talked about earlier in the podcast that compound with the LGBTQ plus community. So essential to understand these intersections and the identities that coincide with these intersections, because they are going to present with unique challenges that you need to navigate in order to offer that comprehensive care. In some cultures, LGBTQ plus identities might be understood differently or may not align neatly with some of those Western conceptions. So approach each of these situations with openness and curiosity. That's going to be the key to this. Okay, finally, I know we're finally at the last part here that we're going to talk about. I know there was a lot of information here, but really important. These questions are becoming, there's a lot of them on the exam now. So you want to be able to identify, one, what the religion, what the culture, what the population is, and then some of the nuances or very key points for each one of these groups, and then what you can do to treat or to show respect. And again, respect is the key word for these questions. So finally, we have the refugee or the immigrant community. It's not a single homogenous group. This is going to consist of a lot of individuals from various countries, cultures, and backgrounds. So they bring a plethora of experiences, so many beliefs and so many practices. The reference to the blend of Indigenous, African, European, Indian, and Chinese influences applies to many regions globally. And these refugees and immigrants might come from any one of these regions or beyond. And then when they get mixed in together, we're going to start creating new religion beliefs, new cultural beliefs as time goes on and they start to influence each other. So it is very comprehensive. It is very can be very difficult to navigate through, but little by little, as we start understanding each one of these groups, we can understand them as a whole and then kind of catch up as we need to as things continue to change moving forward. So let's talk about some of the specifics with regard to refugee and immigrant community. Recognize the trauma many refugees endure, including fleeing and violence, living in refugee camps, and being separated from family members, sometimes indefinitely. Many immigrants or refugees might not speak the dominant language that they have been relocated to. And this is going to be hard because you've got to come up with interpreters and translation services that might not be very easy to find. So there's going to be a lot of legwork, and you want to utilize an interdisciplinary care approach when doing this. Now, an immigrant from a non-conservative society might have different views on gender roles and medical treatments than what's prevalent within their new country. Recognize religious holidays, dietary restrictions, or prayer routines. Again, there's going to be this melting pot that can occur when we're dealing with refugees and immigrants, especially here in the United States, because once they get here, once they've been cleared and they're allowed to come in and assimilate and become part of our culture here, you're going to start getting them all into one area, and you have to identify the differences in order to move forward and help each one of them individually. Again, this goes with holidays, dietary restrictions, and prayer as well. Traditional medicine, home remedies, all things that need to be considered with refugees and immigrants. And then understanding the complexities of statutes and limitations within the immigration system. Who are asylum seekers? Who are undocumented immigrants? And then these rights that are associated with each one of these groups, and then the vulnerabilities that are associated with each one of these strategies and statuses. So communicate with local authorities, talk to, if you're working in a camp or you're working in an area that has now taken on a specific immigrant population or refugee source, you want to talk to the counselors and the state-appointed and federally appointed individuals to understand the group that's coming in and then what expectations they may have for you as a mental health provider. Some refugees and immigrants might come from backgrounds where they have limited access to education, and this is going to affect their literacy levels. So you need to meet them at their level of understanding. If they do not have, they might not even have an equivalent education system like we do here in the United States, where we might think, well, I need to talk to them at a 5th grade level. That might not even be a thing from where they come from. So you need to be able to assess their communication skills, their learning skills, their ability to read and write, and then meet them at that level. Okay, refugees and immigrants might face discrimination and xenophobia in their new country, and this is going to lead to feelings of isolation and alienation. Take that into consideration as well. Remember that the term refugee or immigrant encompasses people from various regions, each with unique culture, history, and challenges. A Syrian refugee might have different experiences and needs than a Venezuelan immigrant. So building cultural competence for this population is going to offer support, understanding, and help you and them navigate within their new environment. And that goes with all of the groups that we're talking about here today. So we've discussed countless, I know probably up to 12 or 15 different groups. A lot of them are very similar, but a lot of them are very different. So what do I want you to take from all of this? Now you should have a pretty general idea of some of the main points with each one of these populations. Now, what does it all have to do with the test or you as a provider in general? You're never going to get it right every time. A simple, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. Can you please explain it to me more so that way I don't make that mistake in the future is going to go a very long way when dealing with individuals. They get it, okay? They know you don't understand where they come from or who they are. They're going to appreciate the fact that you're trying, and then they're going to really appreciate it when the next time you interact with them, you get it right because you learned, you adapted, and you're giving them culturally competent care based on the information that you've received and how you've educated yourself. That's going to hit home, that is going to make them feel comfortable, and that is going to improve the therapeutic relationship more than anything else that you can do. And by the most important thing I can teach you today is respect. If you respect your patient, you respect where they come from, they are going to then respect you as the provider, and we're going to be able to incorporate these therapeutic interventions that are going to help them overcome their disorders or challenges that they're facing. So, if you're a student and you're looking to pass the certification exam, the one thing I want you to remember is the word respect. If you're a seasoned mental health provider and you've already got your certification done and you're practicing, I want you to remember respect is the key word when it comes to culturally competent care. After respect, I would then emphasize education. Educate yourself on who they are, where they come from, what they represent, and then you will be able to be a well-rounded mental health provider. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I know it was a long one, but I think it's a vitally important one. If we want to treat our people, we need to know who our people are. We need to know what they believe, and we need to respect who they are and where they come from. Always remember to shine brightly, and we look forward to being with you in the next podcast. Bye-bye.